Welcome to the Tales of Cape Cod show, brought to you by Tales of Cape Cod Incorporated, the Cape-wide historical organization located in the old Colonial Courthouse in Barnstable Village. I'm John Van Eyderstein.
And I'm Jean Gardner, and we are delighted to have as our guest today the author, Joseph Buckley, who wrote this wonderful book, Wings Over Cape Cod. After you graduated from Harvard, you served in the Navy,
That's right.
And ever since then you've had a strong interest in the history of the Navy. Is that right, Joe?
I certainly have. And I had a wonderful time, Jean, writing this book.
Good.
And I'm thrilled with the response the public is giving it.
Great.
But I'm mostly delighted to be with you people here today. I preserve history through the written word. You carry it to different dimensions. You've got the lecture podium, and you've got the electronic media, and I think we're just doing a wonderful thing.
Good. I'm glad.
When Cape Codders hear military aircraft today, I think they mostly think the aircraft is from the Otis Air Force Base. But when our nation became involved in World War I back in 1917, it was a whole different scene. Why did they pick Chatham, Joe, for the air station?
Yeah, well, they were trying to protect our coast and against submarine attack. And Chatham was strategically located here on Cape Cod to do two things. Number one, to protect the approaches to Boston Harbor. And two, to patrol Nantucket Sound. One, which of course leads into Long Island Sound, and its direct route to New York. So it was a vital place. So now we've got the thing established on Cape Cod. Now we've got to find a spot for it. So they chose Nickerson Neck.
In Chatham.
In Chatham, right. And they had some requirements. They had to have a 35-acre lot. It had to be fairly flat. And it had to have an elaborate sandy beach. And Nickerson Neck met all of these qualifications.
By way of a video clip, we'd like to show our viewers where the base was located and some of the scenes of the construction. That's the Nickerson Farm.
That's the Nickerson Farm, and that was the site that was just ideal for them up there on Pleasant Bay to build their blimp and seaplane station. Construction started in August of 1917. The base went into commission in January of 1918, and the first flights took place in March of 1918.
This was one of the hangars.
This was the blimp hangar. That's a long shot of the blimp hangar, and there were 45 buildings by the time they got done. So it was a pretty elaborate base. It was a pretty important base relative to what people think.
Did the first planes arrived in crates, did they not, at the Chatham
Railroad
Station, and they took them by truck down there and then assembled them at the Nickerson Farm there. And
that's absolutely right, Jean. And they not only brought the planes in, they had to bring everything in. And one of the things that was really kind of interesting to me was that the whole station, these 45 buildings, were all coal-fired. So they had to bring the coal in. They brought it in the Chatham station, they had to transship it in the trucks, then drive it out these pretty tough little back roads, and then unload it once they got out there. And it was one of the coldest winters on record.
Let's see if we can see what the Chatham Railroad Station looked like.
that's a beautiful.
There it is. Oh boy.
That's quite
That
a
little
shot.
siding there, they used to, on the right, they used to line up as many as 8 to 10 coal cars at a time just to bring in the fuel.
A lot of things came in through that station.
Everything, even the people,
Yeah.
even the people.
It's a museum now, Joe.
Yep.
I guess it is.
I think it's a railroad
It
museum
is.
now. Well, this book is so great that I'm just hoping everybody will read it, and it's great that you could come and show it to us today and tell us all about this station down there in Chatham, because people don't know about it.
That's right.
I think we were starting to ask you about the type of planes that
Oh,
you
yeah.
when we got off on the railroad station.
I know.
No problem. The planes did come in through the station, so that's all right. First planes that came in were R9s. R9s were basically a training plane It was adapted for patrol duty. They didn't have any patrol planes at the start of the war. And these were seaplanes, 2-man, and could carry 1 to 2 bombs. Then they evolved into a different type of craft, a flying boat, where the whole hull of the plane was met the water. So we should have some pictures of these coming up.
Yes, we will.
And you also had blimps.
Oh, we had blimps too.
First, we'll look at the plane.
Isn't that a beautiful?
That's an R9, a head-on shot. You can see 2 pontoons, 2 wings, single engine, tractor type. That's a HS-1L, HS-2L seaplane type. This is the 2nd generation of plane at Chatham. This was the really effective plane. This was designed for war. The other thing was designed for training. This is the NC-4. This is the plane that made the trip across the Atlantic, the first trip across the Atlantic in 1919. It stopped at Chatham. We're going to get into that a little bit later, I think.
It should be.
And this is an F-5L. This is a visit at Chatham. This was the latest model that come out of the war. None was stationed at Chatham, but this one came up to bring some very special parts for the NC-4.
Well, you've done a great deal of research, but your father had a lot of these pictures. Am I correct in that?
My father did. My father was stationed at Chatham. He was a yeoman, 2nd class. His first time away from home, somebody gave him some kind of a camera, and he just went around and took all kinds of pictures and just put them in a box. And then when I came back from the service, he said, "I got a surprise for you," and I saw them. I decided to write the book around the pictures.
Good. Well, your book tells about the blimps, and is it a dirigible field?
Yes.
And a hangar that they had down there.
Oh yeah, we can get into that, sure. In addition to these seaplanes that I mentioned, they supported the patrols with blimps. Blimps could go out further. They had a greater range. They're also much slower. And they could have a more thorough search. In addition, they were quieter. So the blimp had its purpose. What it lacked was speed, but it didn't need it. This is a kite balloon. This is a stationary observation type of lighter than aircraft. 2 men hanging there in a basket. The balloon is on a tether, and it goes up about 1,600 feet. This is a C-5. This is an advanced type of blimp. Came in at the end of the war. Chatham had one of these, the C-10, and this is a picture of it as it's approaching the open door of its hangar down there. This is the closed door of the blimp hangar, and the flying field per se had no airplanes on it. The flying field was strictly to land these blimps.
Well, during World War I, the scare along the eastern coast was for the German submarines.
That's
Am I
right.
correct?
That's correct.
And at one time, the famous story goes that a German submarine surfaced off Orleans, and that story has been repeated so many times because they tried to sink the Perth Amboy, that was a tug. Pulling 4 barges, am I correct?
That's absolutely
and
right.
I guess the people on the barges were able to get to shore, and it became a festive day. People came out and stood on the beach and watched all of the activity.
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
That's right.
And that was in 1918.
July 21st, yeah.
1908, a very famous event on Cape Cod.
It was.
There's a further part of the story that says somebody from Orleans called the air station. A lot of the people from the air station were at Provincetown playing baseball.
Yeah.
That's a true story.
Yeah.
They were
So
playing.
a couple airplanes did take off, and they flew over the submarine, dropped a bomb, and then they dropped another, neither of which exploded.
That's correct.
So finally, in frustration, they threw a monkey wrench at it.
But anyway, the sub took off.
Sub took
And
off.
Orleans was spared.
Orleans was spared. Several people were seriously injured on the barges, and nobody was killed.
Oh, that's good.
They did rescue quite a few of them. I believe there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
picture in your book of
Yeah.
the lifeboat with the people being
Right,
rescued.
right. No, they're all rescued, but nobody was killed or drowned.
And we have a couple of pictures of that event too, which we'll
Yeah.
bring up.
Good.
There's a picture of the tug Perth Amboy to the right there on fire. Its superstructure was all burned out. It did. They towed it into Vineyard Haven eventually when the blaze went, and it did get reconstructed and sail again. So they never did sink the tug.
No, I understand the submarine surfaced later over in the English Channel, I think, and I heard that
The same submarine that they
that's
saw.
another story, but I
Okay.
think they didn't do anything with the submarine in this event anyway.
No, the submarine never did make it, though.
Tell us about the NC4. Did that
We're
act?
not quite up to that yet,
Oh, we're
because
not.
a couple
Okay.
of the pictures here.
What have we
This
got
is-
there, Jack?
That's one of the barges, one of the four.
Oh, okay.
Oops, and there's the cartoon.
That was in the Boston Globe, was
That was in
it?
the Boston Globe, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Came out good. The four barges were being towed down from Maine
Okay,
on their way to New Jersey.
okay.
Now we can get to the NC4.
Well, the NC4 had some problems, and something happened on the way to Europe. Am I correct in that?
Actually, there were four of them, weren't there?
Three.
Two?
Well, all right, originally there were four, but only three actually left on the trip. They used the NC2 for parts. Now, the NC1, the NC3, and the NC4 left Rockaway ostensibly for Halifax, then to Trepansey Bay in Newfoundland, over to the Azores and across. The four got as far as Chatham. It came down with engine problems off Cape Cod. The other two went on to Halifax and then to Trepansey. But the four needed major repairs, and they Chatham fixed it.
There it is, right
That's
there.
it. That's a drawing of it. Chatham put it together better than it was when it left Rockaway. And it caught up with the others. They all left Trepansey together, and the other two came down around the Azores, and the NC4 was the only one that made it. So Chatham made a major contribution to the first transatlantic flight. They used some local men, some local mechanics from in town to work on the engines.
They brought the NC4 back, and now
brought-
it's in the museum in Washington, D.C.
Pensacola.
Oh, Pensacola.
Pensacola, yeah.
Well, that's something to
Yeah.
think that all of this took place down there, but
Yeah.
mostly during World War I. Am I correct?
Just after World War I.
And there
right.
wasn't a base there during World War II.
Oh, no.
Okay, it
no.
was World War I.
Right.
And it became the naval air station. Am I correct?
in
in this area?
in New England.
In New England.
In New
All
England.
right, good. There's a lot more history about that.
And before we get too far down the line here, I may be jumping the gun on you here, Joe, but there were quite a few crashes too, I think, of the aircraft.
Oh, yeah.
Can you report on that at all?
Yeah, these planes, they were fragile. I mean, the pilots have to
They
be
look fragile.
heroes to go up in some of these things. They were mainly made out of spruce wood and canvas, and they frequently had difficulty. They'd go out in decent weather. By the time it was time to come back, a storm would come up, and they'd be down. They'd have to send the lifesavers out from the various Coast Guard stations along Cape Cod, along the North Shore up there. And sometimes they had a pretty rough time. The boats would come ashore on the beaches and whatnot. They'd have to truck them back to Chatham.
Oh, now, didn't these gentlemen, airmen, have a good time when they stayed in Chatham? Didn't the natives or the Cape Codders entertain them?
They really did. They interfaced with these people beautifully. They
had them for church suppers?
They had them for church suppers. They even had them try out for a minstrel show. And I think the men loved that. They had dances. There was groups of girls in Hyannis that used to invite them down for dances. And A lot of fraternization went on, good, healthy fraternization.
And some of them
lasted.
Some of them stayed and married
Some of them
local
did. That's
Chatham
absolutely
girls.
right.
Am I correct?
That's absolutely right. My father did not, but he might have been one of the few.
There's another story, it's not directly related to the air station, but it's related to the subject, and I don't know whether you've heard it or whether it's true or not, but the story went that there were some German submarines that were in the area, and at night they would surface and they'd put out some kind of a small boat, and the Germans would go over to Orleans and go to the movies. Did you ever hear that one?
No, I haven't heard that one.
Oh, that's a good
I've heard
one.
a lot, but I haven't heard that one.
Well, I can't vouch for it, but I've heard the story.
I'd like that.
Of course, when you get into the history, you hear a lot of stories.
Oh, sure. That's a good one.
Well, this book is really a great book, and everybody should have it because it tells all about that wonderful air station down there in Chatham, which none of us really know anything about today. So
125 pictures.
125 your father had
120.
collected?
Well, no, he got about 70 of them.
Well,
I
that's
picked the others up
fantastic
myself.
that he had a camera.
Yeah.
That he had a camera and took those pictures. Anyway, we're delighted that you have written this book, and I know we had a great audience when you lectured at Tales of Cape Cod on the book, so it's...
That was a great night.
Thank you.
Now, when the war was over, it's in 1918,
Right.
the station remained for a while, but it did close shortly thereafter.
It did. They shut the station down as an official operating base in 1920 because the war to end all wars had ended. And they kept a skeleton crew there, 1 officer and 10 men, to keep the pigeons alive. The carrier pigeons. It was a carrier pigeon station. And then they put up with that till about 1922, and at that point they shut the whole thing down, put it in caretaker status, hired a civilian to be the government's caretaker, and
What happened
just
to all
let
the
it
buildings,
deteriorate.
Joe? What did they do with all the buildings?
First thing they did is they had a giant auction of everything that was movable,
Okay.
and they sold off all of the movable stuff. Then they put the contracts out to have the buildings taken down,
Okay.
and the buildings were all dismantled, all but 2 or 3, the hangars, and some of the parts went local.
Is there a marker there or anything so that people would know if they went down that area? I suppose it's all
if you go down,
estates now.
it is. It's beautiful estates, but there is a marker to the NC4.
Okay.
It's right at the end of Strong Island Road.
Okay.
As far as you can go, right at the public beach there to the right, there is a marker. It's a stone tablet with a metal plate on it.
Well, it's a great history, and
Did they have a lot of housing there? I'm not sure from the pictures, as far as the people who live there.
the airmen, did they have dormitories?
They had an officers' quarters for the officers, but they had they had barracks for 300
300?
people,
Wow.
and a dining room that would seat 400 people. So they were barely used. By the time they got these things completed, everything was over.
Well, I'm sure that helped the economy in Chatham.
Yeah, it did, and it's amazing as fast as it helped it disappeared just as fast. They just went overnight almost, and the base deteriorated. It had a little bit of a life afterwards. But
So actually, how long was it in operation there? About 1918,
about 1922.
About
yeah.
4 years.
About 4 years.
4 years. Well,
Yeah.
we're thrilled that you wrote this book, Joe, and thanks so much for telling our viewers about it today.
It's been a real great. I've enjoyed this immensely.
Good.
Well,
You
we're
people
not
are great hosts.
We're not quite through yet.
right.
For one thing, we have some pictures of the base as it was being closed down
Oh, yeah.
and when used by some other
Sure.
groups. For one thing, this picture of the Goodyear blimp. What did they do with the blimps up there then?
Okay, this is in 1930 we are now. One of the buildings, as I say, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 of the buildings remained erected. One of them was the blimp hangar, and Goodyear rented the hangar for one summer to photograph and also to take passengers out and broadcast the America's Cup races off Blanc Island of 1930. This is a picture of the guardhouse, the sentries building on the way in. This was building number 2 that remained. This became the caretaker's quarters.
This is the way it looked in the year 2000, where the base was located. Just before that other shot we had, there was a small building. I think that was
the magazine.
Magazine, yeah, and that's how that looked.
That was isolated from all other buildings for obvious safety reasons.
And this is the way it looked in the beginning, before anything was on it.
That's
so
right.
we've gone full circle from the beginning
That's right.
through what they had there, and now just that look again as to how it looked at the conclusion. I wonder what the ramifications were in Chatham after it closed down. Did that affect the
Economy.
commerce up there?
Well, I didn't get into that in my research, but I would think it would have to have some kind of an impact when you have 300 to 400 people stationed there, and a lot of activity. You're bound to have kind of a thriving economy in that area. But sure, they went from there to nothing. So.
Do you recall how many people they had there at its height?
At its height, yes, they had 398 enlisted men and 41 officers. And they had 16 planes, 2 blimps, 3 kite balloons, and a couple of rescue boats, and that was at its peak. And that was taken as of Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918, those figures.
Aside from the incident with the tug, did they have any other incidents that you know of?
Not combat-oriented, no. No, nothing to do with it. They had a lot of fun.
Well,
They
Cape
served
Cod
their
was-
country in a wonderful place.
We were lucky.
Yeah.
We were lucky.
You
that-
know, they were too, to be on Cape Cod.
I know.
Well, we still have some time, so I wonder if there are any other aspects we haven't covered that we should.
One of the things that they did do after the war, just before they closed the base down, they had to keep these people busy. So what they did is they decided they'd assign Chatham to become a major recruiting station, using the planes as recruiting vehicles. So they took the planes and flew them up, believe it or not, the Connecticut River, the Merrimack River, and the Penobscot River. And they stopped at all these cities like Springfield and Lawrence and Haverhill and Hartford and Holyoke and Rockland, Maine and whatnot. And these people are just astounded to see submarine patrol planes landing in their rivers. And they were very successful at recruiting, using this as a weapon. This was a weapon to recruit. This was in 1919. People were just delighted. They came in droves down to see these planes at every
Do you
place
know
they
who the
landed.
commander was of that station?
Yeah, his name was Brewer
Okay.
at that time.
But it was a vital part, played a vital part in the protection of Cape Cod during World War I.
It was. Yeah, the nearest thing to it was the next one down the road was Montauk, Long Island. So they had quite a patrol area. And they went all the way to the Canadian line. So they had a pretty good expanse with their blimps to cover.
Now, when they first opened the station, did they have people who were trained to do that from elsewhere, or did they have to start from scratch? And
No. Chatham did not have any training function at all. Everybody that came was fully prepared to fly and to conduct their operations.
Do you know if they had these type bases elsewhere along the coast?
Yeah, right. They had them at Pensacola, at Montauk Point. They had them at Far Rockaway. They had them at
Connecticut someplace?
No. They had them at Far Rockaway. They had them at Miami and Coca-Cola in the Canal Zone. So they had good representation, but
I imagine
they also had one at Cape May too, Cape May, New Jersey.
I imagine they all had to get to Cape Cod by train.
Oh yeah, train to Boston,
Train to Boston.
and then train to Chatham. Yeah.
Now, when they were protecting the coast, I'm sure they also had to go out and protect the islands, like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard? Did
Oh,
they
sure.
patrol
Oh, yeah.
out in that area?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there were a number of times they landed off of Nantucket. They landed so many times off of Nantucket due to bad weather and this or that, they eventually put in a relief station in there so they could refuel and go ashore and relax and whatnot till the weather changed.
I know in World War II there was quite a bit of submarine activity off of those islands, and they had a gunnery station up on top of Cuttyhunk, and I don't know whether they shot any submarines from up there, but I do know the submarines sunk a series of boats off of that island at that time.
There were several ships sunk off of Nantucket by German submarines, and some of those were before this base was fully operational. But yeah, there was German submarine activity off the coast.
Well, apparently they didn't feel it was necessary to have the station there in World War II.
Actually, the land was too small. The planes had grown so big, and the requirements of the planes were so big that they looked at reactivating it, and they decided to put their money in Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and Squantum, Massachusetts, and they developed those two, because Chatham also had a lot of bars to it too, and reefs and whatnot. The bigger planes couldn't handle.
Chatham has a lot of fog too.
A lot of fog.
A lot of fog.
And one of the things they checked was the lightship, Stonehorse lightship, I think it was. They checked the weather log out there, and that was very discouraging. A lot of fog.
Good. Well, anyway, we're delighted and honored that you came today with your book, Wings Over Cape Cod.
Let's see if we can get it up once more so that
all right, so everybody
get
can
the camera
see
over
this
on it.
beautiful book. And Joe, we appreciate your coming today. So our viewers know about this first Naval Air Station on Cape Cod.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I really have to say that what we've done here, it just scratched the surface on the history that's in that book.
That's right.
It's really amazing, and certainly anyone that's interested in that subject certainly should read the book, because it's very, very complete and very thoroughly documented.
And it has over 100 pictures?
125.
Okay.
Well, we're at that point where we have to wrap this show up, and I just want to remind our viewers that the show is brought to you by Tales of Cape Cod Incorporated, the Cape-wide historical organization located in the old colonial courthouse in Barnstable Village, and we'd like to invite all who may be interested to our historical lectures every Tuesday night in July and August at 7:30 at the courthouse. So come in and see us. We'll be looking forward to meeting you there. But now it's time to close. I'm John Van Eidestein.
And I'm Jean Gardner, and thank you again.
I'm Joe Buckley. Thank you very much, fellows and girls.
And for this time, until the next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.
Good.